All right. So, first item is the approval of the minutes of the March 15th meeting, which were distributed. What are the wishes? Move by Peckham,
Second by Will Harris.
seconded by Harris. To approve the minutes, are there any additions, corrections, or questions? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
Aye.
no. That motion carries. So, presentation, listening session follow-up. Eric, do you want to summarize the discussion that we had this afternoon relative to the status of the report? You're muted.
Yeah, I've only been doing this for a year now. So we discussed that we have a draft of the report from the listening session. Now, we understand, because of open meeting laws and that kind of thing, that, technically this is going to be a public document. However, our intent was not really to make the results of the listening phase some kind of a big reveal or rollout to the public. That said, it obviously has to be available to the public. So what we are doing is putting some final touches on it, just making sure that all the names are redacted and just some final touch-ups. And we'll be giving that report to John, handing it over to John probably by Friday, if not maybe Monday at the latest. And then it will be up to the city to determine when and how it wants to share that publicly. My thinking is it was mostly an effort to build some trust with the public, as well as to help us to set up a series of topics we thought would be relevant for survey questions and focus group questions. And I'm going to talk about that briefly in a minute. Of course, there's nothing secret in it. If you want to make it available to the public upon request, that's really up to you. And we're just going to turn it over to you guys and let you decide how you want to share it. Does that sum up, John, what we talked about, or is there anything else that I'm missing?
I think the only thing that we were going to do is just run it through the police department's review and redacting process to make sure that we protect the names of the individuals. So, were there any questions relative to the findings that you had? And I know it's hard absent the actual report in hand, but that'll be driving some of the discussions over the next two meetings in the survey going forward. Were there any questions following up on last month's meeting? Okay. If not, then we'll move on to the public survey update.
Okay, is it possible for me to share a quick couple of slides here?
Yes.
Okay, I will attempt that. I sometimes have a few issues with WebEx and my laptop, so please let me know if you're not seeing it. In fact, I'm not seeing it. Hold on a sec. Okay, I'm seeing it. Are you seeing the slides?
Not yet, no. There we go.
Yes,
Okay.
So.
Excellent. So we are in the survey phase. We're full bore into this process. Just to kind of give you the timeline overview, we kind of compiled. That should be compiled. Phase 1 feedback. We've done that. I want to say, give all of you a big thank you for your willingness to meet with Rudy and myself to complete that, because we really felt it was critical that we have input from each of you regarding your priorities for the survey questions and ultimately the focus group questions. So we appreciated you taking the time. The only person we missed was Kaylee, so I don't know if you're there, Kaylee, because I can't see everybody. But if you are, it's not too late. We haven't fully pulled everything together, so we'd love to meet with you for just it literally takes about 15, 20 minutes just to get your feedback on a couple of questions, if that's okay. So I can email you separately to try to set that up. So what we have in hand then is a list of all of the main themes and topics, kind of written out in some draft questions, not the type of questions we would actually put on the survey, but kind of similar type questions. And our next step is what we're going to call the topic prioritization. So we would really appreciate the opportunity to meet with with this group as a body, and we're going to go through a ranking process of the topics, because we have about, according to my master list, we have about 105 topics. Now, we could probably consolidate that down right now to about 75, but still, that's not just 75 topics. It maybe is worth, 100 to 125 questions, which is way too long. We want to get the survey down to about 12, 15 minutes max. So, that could be anywhere from 50, 60 questions. So we have some work to do because we can't do it all. So we're going to ask for your help in whittling down those topics and question ideas. And we're going to talk about that in a second. I'm just going to finish going through the timeline. So once we prioritize those topics, the research team will then draft a set of survey questions. We will then go back and forth with you, all of you as members of the task force, to make sure that you see those questions, that you can respond to those questions, meaning you can adjust them, you can modify them, we'll probably have to go through some further kind of whittling down to get to the point where we have a survey that we feel is ready for prime time. Once we feel like we've got that kind of instrument in hand that we all can agree to, we're going to test the instrument, and I'm really grateful to the Wausau Police Department because they have volunteered to have a few of their officers actually take the test and kind of give us some feedback on what they think about it. We'll also probably test it among some residents that we'll select, almost like in a focus group type fashion. So we'll test the instrument, we'll refine it based on any feedback we get from that testing. And we will have a final version that will be ready by May 15th, and we will launch survey on May 15th. We're still discussing the modes of delivery, but it looks like we're kind of norming around a multi-mode kind of system where we'll have some paper versions in English and probably Spanish. We will also have an online version, and we will be engaged in kind of a pretty serious marketing campaign to try to get as much participation as possible. We will encourage people who are residents of Wausau to take the survey, but we will also be looking to encourage people who work in Wausau. So we'll probably be spreading the word out, really to the county, so that people who work and visit Wausau regularly will have a chance to participate in the survey if they choose. So we will, by mid-June, we'll have all of the data. We'll start to collect the data, collate it, and begin analyzing it. Around that same time in July, we'll be starting our focus groups. We want to make sure we get a little bit of the data analyzed before we launch into the focus groups, just to make sure that we know what we want to follow up with in more depth with those focus group conversations. But we'll be setting those up this summer. As we do those focus groups by the end of July, we'll put together the data we have from the surveys, from the focus groups, and we'll write the report. We'll send that report to you guys for feedback, possibly more than once, more than one iterations, and then we'll present the final report to you in August. So that's the timeline. Any questions about that before we go to next steps?
Yeah, you tell me a little bit about how you're going to select the participants in the focus groups? Are they going to be people that you kind of pick out as a result of the survey stuff, or see Mr. Barnes here can help?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think
go ahead.
I think the point behind that was that whatever the outcome of this is, I'd like our officers, it's important to me that they buy into the suggestions or the information and the survey. So we also discussed with the group that understanding what information would be valuable for the police department, it might make sense to have officers, which I can ask for volunteers. I don't think we're going to hand select who takes it, but get some officers to volunteer, look at it, and they might be critical of a question or how a question's worded, or look at the survey and provide guidance to the group. And I think the WIPS crew that was putting the survey together thought that would be valuable, as well as getting the same type of feedback from members of the community. So I don't think there's a plan necessarily in place on which officers are going to do it, but not the command staff at the police department. These would be our line staff.
That's the test phase though, right?
Correct. That's my understanding. Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, is that's while you're still validating and that's a draft, taking a look at a draft, and the potential exists for changes after that.
So when push comes to shove in July and you're actually conducting these focus groups, who's in them?
We will be addressing that probably at a later meeting, but I think what we've committed to date is we've committed to 2 focus groups with the police department staff, one with management and one with line staff, and the rest of the groups will be determined, which populations we target with those. That'll be a subject of a future meeting.
Yes, and Pat, we will be asking you guys for your input on that question and decision.
Although I think it's important, and there might be some confusion, there's 2 different things. There's one is to take a look at the survey and make sure there aren't any concerns from a police department standpoint or a police officer standpoint with the questions and what we're seeking. And then separate of that, there's focus groups with our staff to be available to this task force to find out what's important to the officers and what concerns they might have with the community or the department or their deputy chief.
Correct. So yes, we do know for sure that we'll be doing some focus groups with Wausau PD members or officers. So, but there'll be others as well. So we'll work with you to identify which groups, if any, specific groups we want to target versus just some general populace. Any other questions? Sorry.
Are there any other questions at this time? If not, please proceed.
Okay, so this is the last slide, so I'll keep it short. The next steps, the immediate next steps. We would like to engage you guys the task force in a topic ranking process. And we envision this as kind of a 2-step process. The first part will be, we'll set up kind of an online ranking, voting, if you will, system. So the idea there is to do a little groundwork where we don't have to do this, in person or virtually, but you can do it on your own. And what will likely come out of that? What we expect to come out of that? I mean, right now, like I said, we have we have over 100 kind of separate topics, if you will, kind of phrased as preliminary questions. We might consolidate that down to about 75. Then we're going to have you go through and rank or vote on those. And what we expect is that we'll get some consensus around those topics and issues that are going to float to the top, that you all will agree we must have questions on these topics in the survey. And we're hoping that you'll also have some consensus at the bottom, meaning some topics that you really don't rank very high that we can kind of just take off the table. That's going to leave a pretty significant middle swath, though, of questions, which some of you are going to feel that are important, and some of you probably are not. And we're going to have some need for some deliberation around, which of those things need to rise to the top and be put on the survey. And we'll try to have some principles in place or guidelines, things like, we've heard you guys say already, we really want this survey to be a potential baseline survey. So that's going to be one of those guidelines and principles to make sure that we're following that. There may be some other guidelines that we'll add to that. But the point is, we need a second meeting, a second step of this process, which is to meet virtually once we have the rankings done, and then we can, spend that time actually deliberating which of these topics, you want to see in the survey. So John and I were talking about the possibility of maybe convening the committee in 2 weeks, or the task force in 2 weeks. But we're kind of flexible on that, or at least the research partners are flexible. So, John, do you have anything you want to add about that, or?
Well, I think this is a critical issue because we have to identify what the topics are and begin that process of formulating the questions, particularly if we're going to meet that May 15th deadline for the rollout. So if you have your calendars, if you could look, would 2 weeks from today work for a meeting? And does that work for this building and the mayor? And again, what we would, are you available on the 21st? I know it's the Joint Finance Committee meeting in Rylander, but I would hope that by the evening we would be back. I know, Michael, you're going to probably be there, and Katie and I'll be there for the county. But would that work, that evening work?
What date again, John?
It'd be the 21st. And again, the purpose of that would be to look at the topics and the themes and the sort of the questions. Hopefully by then he will have shared with us that the initial list, you'll go through and rank some of that so we can streamline that process a little bit. But make sure we can get at giving them the guidance that they would need to develop that questionnaire. So would the 21st work?
Is it the same time?
6:30.
Okay, that works for me.
The room is available.
Yeah, I mean, I should be able to, at the very least, be remote, but I should be back by then.
We thought you'd use all your power to get us all in early?
I'll talk to my friends on joint finance.
That should be a short list. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet and move on. So let's plan on the 21st. Again, in about a week before that meeting, approximately, you'll be getting the list of the themes with a number of questions and or concerns that have been raised. They'll be fleshed out a little bit more. You'll be asked to rank order those, and then we'll get back here and make sure that we're, reach some sort of consensus, and then from that, they'll finalize the surveys. So it would be helpful, I think, because it would open up some additional opportunities if we can, as many of us as possible, be here in person, although the virtual option is available. I think for something like that, it's better if we can all get together in one room.
I don't want to make it sound as if you miss that meeting, because I know I heard maybe a couple might have to, that somehow you're not going to have a chance to review it, because even after we get through that, I'm sure that we'll still have more questions than we can possibly use. So, but we'll try to put whatever is out there, draft the questions, and then get them back to you to whittle that down further. So the point is you'll have a chance for input. And if we get to the point where we've got the draft survey and you're looking at it and you think, my gosh, I really think we have to add something here because we missed something, we're going to have that sort of iterative process, mostly by email, but where everyone will have a chance again to weigh in and make sure that we have the right instrument on the table.
Pat?
Yeah, Eric, I'm just wondering, if there are 105 topics, and Chair Robinson just said we're going to rank those, am I going to be deciding which is number 47 and which is number 48? Or
No, I think that's a great question, Pat. I appreciate you asking that. I think we're going to try to consolidate. I think there's some redundancy in some of the topics, so hopefully we'll get it down to, let's say, about 75. That's still a lot, but you won't have to rank every one. I think what we'll do is we'll probably be doing we haven't fully decided this, but we might do kind of a little bit of a double ranking process where we'll have you rank the main themes, of which there are only about 20 to 25. So we'll start with that, and then within each area or theme, we'll probably give you a certain number of votes, and we'll ask you to kind of I'm just making this up, we might give you 15 votes or 20 votes or something like that. And so basically, you'll just vote for those topics that you really feel are most important. And so I think that will end up giving us some interesting data. Hopefully, I mean, the goal is not necessarily to literally rank each one, but it will give us a sense of where are we norming, where do we think there's agreement, and where do we not, and where is sort of the middle area. Like, imagine this, if we were doing this in person, we'd probably put these 75 topics on the wall. We'd give you sticky notes, and we'd have you, give you 15 sticky notes and have you place your sticky note on the topic and vote like that. And we just kind of, eyeball which of these do we feel like we, are norming around, which ones can we get rid of, which ones do you want to keep, and then those in the middle, let's start deliberating which of these we really, really want.
Yeah, you've been through this before and I haven't, but I was thinking it might be helpful if we each said, these are 15 that we really need to ask, and these are 15 that, we don't maybe need to ask. And that would help to do an initial sort anyway. So I like your
That's a
thinking.
great idea. I actually like that second addition, because I hadn't thought about that, but maybe we could have a few votes of no votes, right? That might help us see a few things that we can take off the table. So yeah, that's kind of how we want to proceed. So thank you for that.
So Eric, anything else?
Not really, just, yeah. I appreciate your time, and if anyone has any questions, I'm certainly available to ask them. I know you have some other business to take care of those, so.
Well, one of the other items that we talked about at the technical meeting today was just what's the rollout of the survey and how do we roll the survey out? Is it done as a mailer? Is it done on the internet? How do we advertise it? Is it limited to the city? And I think, Matt was there and I was there. I think we both felt strongly that it needs to be beyond the city because, you look at Matt works in the city, but he lives in Mosinee, and you've got Matt Haywood from Aspirus, who's a key employer in the city that lives in the village of Maine, I believe, and others. So we want to make sure we capture those people, and so they're giving some thought to it. But we will be asking this task force at our next meeting to give some thought to how we'll want to roll that survey out. I think the thing is we want to build the momentum for it when the survey's available, so people have a chance to capture it. We also understand that there may be the way that the survey is distributed may impact the demographics of who fills it out. So they're looking at that, and we'll need to talk about that at our next meeting. And again, with the target date of the May 15th rollout. So we'll look for the members to help identify that strategy to maximize participation. And Pat, giving you some of your background, I think that would come in very helpful. So, any other questions? Eric, you're muted again.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Just to follow up on what John said, one thing that I think the research team is norming around is we really feel like this needs to be a multimodal kind of distribution plan. So what I mean by that is we'll probably have some paper copies available. We may even be sending some out to different households in the city, but then we're going to need to have a very strong online component. Quite frankly, a strong marketing campaign to go along with that because we want to get people who don't live in the city, as we've already mentioned, and so the more people that hear about it and know about it. So we've already started talking a little bit about that. Just as an example, on the paper side, we were talking with Tony Gonzalez, and he's going to be checking in with the Spanish-speaking community in our county, but he's sort of given us an early indication that he thinks a paper copy would maybe be best for that population. So again, we're going to use some multimodal distribution elements to this survey. And we'll talk more about that in a couple weeks.
Any other questions? Not, thank you. Then we're moving on to the presentation of the human service issues affecting policing. And That was actually meant to be the category as we begin to shift gears from the internal operations of the police department. We wanted to begin that discussion of what are the pressures from the human services and social services side that impact the police officers' daily activities. And tonight we'll get a high-level overview and then a discussion of the need for social workers in the homelessness project. And Matt, do you want to introduce the topic?
Certainly. Let me start by apologizing on Chief Belivin's behalf. He had some unforeseen, unplanned circumstances occurred today that prevent him from being here tonight. So you get the B team, that's me. So he did provide me with some of his thoughts, and yeah,
It's all the B team.
well, it's
Barnes
still,
and Bleva,
it's still the B team. It's
B
what we
squared.
say. So I have some of his thoughts on this and some of my own, and I did have the opportunity to talk to the chairman about how we might want to narrow in on a couple of things. And he starts in his notes with a quote from Albert Einstein, and I'll butcher it, but the world we created today has problems which cannot be solved by thinking the way we thought when we created them. And that's a thing that we at the police department have been recognizing the need to do for several years. I just didn't know it was Albert Einstein, so it makes me think we were on the right track there. Because we have all sorts of problems that we've dealt with. They existed when I started 21 years ago, and they still exist today, if not at the same level, at a more significant level. So we need to find creative ways and new ways to address those problems if we expect there's going to be positive change. So when we think about policing and the issues in our community, they're very different today than they were 21 years ago when Chief Blivin and I were patrol officers here. The amount of dealing with social issues and the percentage of our time that's spent on that is significantly increased. So I just want to go through kind of a list of some of the high-level ones that we deal with, and then we'll specifically talk about a social work component, and then we'll give Officer Lemerand, who's here, and he's our Housing Task Force officer, the opportunity to talk to you about that program and what we're doing. Existed then and existed now is drug and alcohol addiction and the AODA problems that we deal with. I think Chief Blivin and I would agree that we are not going to arrest our way out of that issue here in this community, so there's definitely room for improvement. And, you know, we didn't have heroin in Wausau when I started here. I didn't see heroin for the first 15 years I was a police officer here. So to know that so far this year in 2021, we've dealt with 5 fatal overdoses, which equals the number of fatal overdoses we dealt with all of last year. So we are hopefully going to see a reduction in that trend, but it's scary to think about what that might look like. So we still have lots of alcohol issues. We still have lots of methamphetamine issues. And that's something we deal with regularly. We obviously are going to hear about the issues we have with homelessness and some of the proactive and steps we're taking to try and address that. We have significant mental health issues that our officers deal with on a daily basis, not all of which are chaptering or taking someone's freedom away or taking them to the healthcare center. We deal with kids on a daily basis who we believe their mental health is suffering. We're working with the schools on mental health. We're working with the mental health of victims here at the police department. So mental health and the mental health of our officers, to be honest with you. So mental health is a key component that we're dealing with on a regular basis. Domestic violence issues in our partnership with the women's community and the work that's being done. I looked it up today. In 2020, our officers at the Wausau Police Department responded to 835 calls that qualify as a domestic disturbance. Those are the highest risk. Those are very impactful calls. They're the ones we respond lights and siren to, so that's a pretty huge number. We deal with family issues on a regular basis, and that's going to come into the conversation I'm going to have with you about social services. That goes from everything from the family that has a child that has behavioral issues and is out of control to dealing with the poverty that family might be dealing with and trying to find solutions for them. We have lots of issues within our schools. You'll notice there was a referendum that just narrowly passed last night to to deal with pupil services within the schools, and that's also something that impacts our officers. So the mental health of the kids, the AODA issues that they're dealing with, truancy, the current lack of a truancy court and the tools available to us to try and get kids in school and paying attention, they don't exist today. They did previously. That's a social issue we're dealing with, and different solutions we're trying to come up with and partner with the county to try and have that. And then I think the reason we were asked to talk about some of these social issues is each one of those things could be an entire evening for you folks to learn about those challenges here. So depending on, first off, feel free to interrupt if there's something you want to know more about. I want to make sure you're informed on that. But one of the reasons I was asked to come, even when Chief Bloom was going to be here, is to talk about social workers and what the relationship between social workers and police officers is. And I'll start by saying that we have had a long-standing great relationship with all the different social workers that go out and do social work. And it goes in different categories, right? They're responsible for the kids that are having behavioral issues. They're also responsible for children in need of protective services. They conduct simultaneous investigations with us when we have neglected children or abused children or they're drug endangered children. And so our officers are all on a first name basis with the social workers currently and work with them. I would say that most of that work is reactive. So we encounter a situation and we recognize a need for a social worker to be involved, and we contact them and we engage with them. But that's after we've gone to that situation. And no matter what we do, we're still going to have a lot of that. And the question really came up, like, how could we do better? And as we look at some of the things that I consider very successful in our department, I think about our CART team. It's where we've taken officers that receive additional training in mental health care and crisis intervention training, and we partner them with crisis mental health professionals from North Central Healthcare under our roof. And what we see there, we want the exact same thing to occur with a social worker, which is increased relationships. As those relationships increase, so does the trust. As the trust increases, so does our responsibility to each other and the knowledge base for our officers to understand more about social work and more about the resources available and the statutes and the rules that have to be followed and how to provide those services. And the social workers begin to understand more about the law enforcement challenges and what we deal with on a daily basis. So looking at ways in which partnering at a much more intimate level with a social worker came up with the idea that what if we bring a social worker in-house from Marathon County Social Services to work out of the police department and really be a liaison. One, they'd be immediately available to our staff and vice versa, but they could also be a liaison and create an even more a closer relationship between social services and the police department. Initially, we had identified a grant that we thought might allow us to fund that. Turns out that that's not a very good option for us, so that was taken off the table to our disappointment. But I will tell you, I saw a silver lining when, after that conversation occurred with social services, they looked at us and said, hey, but if it was a good enough idea that we'd apply for a grant, we need to find better ways to partner. And it might not be exactly what we were looking at doing, but we see value in that, and we're brainstorming ideas and ways to do that. We also think that we'll be looking in the future here to find funding sources and find a way to do that, because we believe that having that social worker in-house is going to be very beneficial to this community. A simple way to look at this take a drug investigation, for example. Instead of waiting until we execute a search warrant, at which point in time we kick in a door and we're executing this drug search warrant and we find children in the home, then we call social services and say, hey, we potentially have some drug endangered children, here's the situation, can you send someone over, what are we gonna do? Everything's reactive at that point. But the alternative would be if we're doing pre-warrant surveillance and we understand what the situation is and we see kids walking into that home at 3:30 in the afternoon wearing backpacks and they're elementary school age kids. And now we know in advance that there's children in the home, and we are working closely with a social worker. We bring them into the loop and we start to get background information on what services those kids maybe have received, any concerns that social services had in the future. And we might adjust the timeline of when that search warrant based on hazards that are perceived for those children. Or we can get services already lined up so that when actions are taken from a law enforcement standpoint, those kids are less traumatized as a result of that. And you can take that example and apply it to just about any investigation we would do. And lastly, not everybody needs social services to come in and take children away. And a great example of that is today, social services, their leadership, Vicki Tilka, and Krista Jensen and myself and Lieutenant Nathan Seiler were on a WebEx call with a social worker out of the city of La Crosse. And La Crosse has neighborhood social workers that partner very closely with neighborhood police officers. And the idea behind that is they are social workers that are out there to provide services to the community and build trust and not be the CPS worker that comes to take kids away. It's to reduce the frequency at which the CPS worker has to get involved because they're providing services proactively and identifying those individuals that need those services before it becomes a full-blown incident that has to be screened in by social services. And it was fascinating, and the statistics and the reduction in CPS calls, the reduction in police calls, the reduction in truancy, the reduction in suspensions for the kids in that neighborhood after engaging at a much more intimate level and a more proactive level from social workers and law enforcement, to be honest with you, it seemed like a no-brainer. That's what we need to do. We need to start solving problems before they're full-blown problems, and we see a much better partnership with social services as part of that solution.
Could I just ask a question relative to the degree? How many times, in particular with the drug cases, is child welfare services involved? Do you have any idea?
I would answer that pretty generically with frequently. Like when I was talking to Lieutenant Melinda Pauls, who runs our CROW unit, our community resource unit that does a lot of those search warrants and those drug investigations, her words were, I'm on the phone with them every day. So that's not necessarily to say they're out engaged in the community every day, but the frequency at which kids are determined to be drug endangered children as a result of those investigations is frequent. Any other questions about social workers and social service?
Go ahead.
So in both cases of pairing a crisis worker, which we do with you, and pairing a social worker with a police officer, thinking of this in a broader, wider context, I mean, what is it about these interactions that requires a police officer to be part of this? I mean, could social services or crisis services do the job on their own effectively if some other issue was addressed? Why is it that police have to be part of that team? And don't get me wrong, I think that that's good, but I think that's a construct of the reason why you're there in the first place, which is that the ordinances or the statutes require you to be there for some type of process. But
Right.
that could be changed.
Yeah, I think that's the easy answer, which is the police officers are the ones that can take a person's freedom away for emergency detention and have to sign the form. I think when I look at broader narratives about that, I see, hey, it should just be these people who are dealing with it, not police officers. They shouldn't be handling it. And then there's another component that says, hey, which is frequently the current situation, which is we send police to deal with that. And I will tell you that when we see either one of those scenarios, they might muddle their way through it, but when we see partnership and working together, we seem to get better outcomes. People are always going to call the police. Police are the ones that can respond 24 hours a day, lights and siren, and get there. But they don't necessarily have the background to be able to solve it. But when it's both that respond, and we don't know whether it's going to go down the police path or whether it's going to go down, if we take crisis workers, for example, whether it's going to go down the crisis worker path, but to have both those resources there immediately who have the same positive interest for that individual, and that's their motive for being there. I think we have seen tremendous strides in the quality of the services we're providing to them and the speed at which we get those services to individuals. And there's a small component of it, which is the people that are receiving these services, are not always in a great place, and having a police officer there creates a much safer environment, whether it be for a social worker going into a house and trying to figure out what the situation is there and create positive change, or whether the person's in crisis and is a harm to themselves or others and determining that. It sure seems to me that that partnership, I'd be the first one to tell you, we shouldn't send police officers to solve all these problems, whether it be mental health or homelessness or social issues or behavioral issues with kids. But currently, we're the ones that get the call. So to up our ability to provide better services and get the services in a timely manner right there, that's what requires that partnership. I look forward to a day, probably I'll be retired at that point, when we have these social services in place, whether they be mental health or otherwise, and a police department, you're no longer needed because we have such a great handle on what's going on and we can get those services to them in another way. I just don't see that happening in the immediate future, given the current system that's in place. And there's a lot of work being done to try and rectify that.
So let me follow up on Michael's question. So your involvement tends to be on interdictions, for instance, the sale of drugs or other things, versus a report of child abuse. You don't necessarily go out for the child abuse case, neglect case that may be reported through the schools, do you? Is there a difference, or what is the range of the services that you're providing right now? Is there a difference? Are the children incidental to the visit, or are they the cause of the visit?
I would say that when we talk about drug cases, the children are incidental to it. There's an investigation and getting probable cause to make arrests or get the drugs or whatever the goal of the investigation is, and the children are secondary to that investigation. So we involve social services and we're like, here, take care of this situation. But we're dealing with it on the front end because we don't have social workers with us when we're doing that. The neglect or child abuse cases come in two fashions. One, they could be reported to law enforcement and we're the first person to deal with that situation, and we have to recognize what it is and then engage social services, because there's two investigations that take place with that, parallel to each other, but it's also in concert with each other. So that might be, we're the first responder to it, but there's also reports to social services of child abuse, child neglect, and the social workers may be looking at that situation, and then they also involve us. And they might have already done some looking into that, but they're also involving us, and we're running parallel investigations into that.
Michael, did you have a follow-up? Okay, any other questions right now?
Okay, and then the second topic we wanted to talk to you about as a social issue is homelessness. And first thing I want to just share with the group, and I got to tell you, we've spent a significant amount of time learning about homelessness, and what I thought I knew was really proven to be wrong, and my eyes were open to the issue in our community. So we have what I would call the face of homelessness, which are people sleeping outdoors, people that Officer Lemeran's going to talk about working with. Currently in our community, we've identified about 50 people who I would put in that category. But there's also a significant amount of homelessness and people that are on a bubble. And if you look at the definition that the school would use for what's a homeless student, it would include the parents that lost their housing and they went to a family member or friend and they're couch surfing or living in their family room, or they have a roof over their head, they have a place to go, but they don't necessarily have a home that's theirs. And so we have we have the face of homelessness, but we also have people either on the verge of homelessness or people who are homeless but have shelter because people have taken them in. And I didn't quite grasp the significance of the individuals who I would call in fear of homelessness and who are one paycheck or one lost job away from finding themselves in a situation that they don't know how they're going to come out of. And Eric may speak to that a little bit. I said, well, those aren't the people you're working with, Eric. And he's like, I'm sticking my toe in the water, and I'm identifying that some effort put in that area can prevent that number 50 that we're dealing with from growing. So just the historical context of how we end up with Officer Lemerand working as part of our housing task force. We had issues and complaints in this city, and Mr. Peckham, I'm sure, can remember this, where we had homeless individuals that were living in our parking ramps, and it was affecting businesses downtown and people sleeping in the hallways and in the stairwells. And like, police department solved this problem. And we didn't have the tools necessary to solve this problem, so we wanted an ordinance that didn't allow people to live in our stairwells. And ultimately, that ordinance was passed. I'm not aware that we have ever issued a ticket for it, but it gave us the ability to remove people from the stairwells. And that created an uproar in criminalizing homelessness, and we understood that going in. And what came out of that after the ordinance was passed is Chief Bliven and the police department invited stakeholders in, and we were like, we want to do something. And put together groups to have actionable items. And those groups have splintered off now into subgroups that are addressing specific issues. But it really wasn't like, that's what can we put together infrastructure to do something in the future. And I'll give Michael Loy credit because the chief and I are talking to Michael, and it's like, we need to do something now for this, so what can we do? And he put resources of the healthcare center on the table and said, hey, I'm willing to commit this, and here's a model that I saw, and here's a way that we can tweak it here. And the police department said, well, we'll do the same thing. We will pull one of our patrol officers. We have one less patrol officer dealing with patrol-related issues, and we're going to do something right now. And what was born out of that is our housing task force, and that is a case management professional from North Central Healthcare that is a police officer with a passion for homeless individuals and helping people improve their life. And it also included receiving grant funding from the Greenheck Foundation to be able to rent a house, because we felt like telling someone, hey, let us help you find housing and all the challenges of that, as opposed to, do you want a roof over your head tonight? And if you're willing to improve, and here are the things that we're going to do that does not require you to quit drinking today, come with me, and we'll provide you with shelter. So all of those things exist right now. I guess I'd like you to give Eric some direction on, he can tell you success stories that might bring a tear to your eye, and he can tell you the failures. It is a frustrating challenge to deal with a homeless population. And specifically, about a week and a half ago, Eric came in my office frustrated. He's like, I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I'm like, tell me what you mean. He's like, I feel like I'm failing. Like, here's an example, and here's an example. I said, hey, do you think anyone expected you to solve everybody's issue overnight here? Because I treat it like a professional baseball player. Like, what do you tell the guy that gets a hit 3.5, out of every 10 at bats? I was like, what's that? I'm like, Hall of Famer. Because you're going to strike out. The difference is that we're committed to continuing to get back up to the plate and swing again. And we're going to hit a lot of foul balls, and occasionally we're going to hit one out of the park, and we're going to celebrate that because it's one person at a time. So with that being said, I'd like to invite Officer Eric Lemerand up here. He's doing spectacular things, and we're very fortunate to have someone that has such a passion for that population.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. I appreciate it. Chairman, I'll tell you the same thing Deputy Chief Barnes did. As I could talk for hours, so feel free to focus me on the information that the task force would like to know. Mostly, I appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you all and share with you what I'm doing. It's something that I never thought I would do, especially in this role. A lot of learning, but definitely very needed in our community. Homelessness is an individual process to resolve for everybody. It all looks the same from the outside, but once you start looking into the individuals, you understand that there's some people who need housing, there's people who need AODA, there's people who need mental health, there's people who need financial assistance, and there's people who need some of all of it. I like to say that I used to think homelessness was a linear process, or resolving homelessness was a linear process where you get them this step and this step, and before you know it, you're out of it. You're good, and you're independent, and you've established yourself in a better spot in our community. Unfortunately, what I've seen is it's really a spider web where you have to take a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and then you come over here and grab this to help them, and then maybe you go back over to this issue, and just really taking those barriers away so that at some point in the process, they are, like I stated, independent and productive members of our community. One of the reasons why I'm really passionate about this is because I see the value in these people, right? Everybody, all of us have value in our community, including those individuals. And to me, they've lost sight of that value. And maybe we as a community have lost sight of their value to us. So really what I try to do is just give them that value back and show them that value so that they can see it and take the necessary steps to resolve those barriers. A success story that I have, there's a female in her late 50s who for the last probably 4 years has been a chronic homeless individual, heavy user of our resources, fire department, ambulances, medical facilities, the police department specifically. There's days, 6-7 calls for service a day for this individual. A lot of AODA issues, trauma in her past that caused those AODA issues. So there's a mental health aspect to her. And it was always kind of get her a step, and she goes back 4 steps. And you go, okay, what am I going to do? And as a patrol officer, you go, I don't know. I don't have these resources, and I've got 15 other calls for service that I've got to do. So you put a little Band-Aid on it. What I've been able to do now is take that individual, take her, and say, okay, what do you need? Initially, as I'm forming my relationship with her, she says, I hate Wisconsin, and I hate Wausau, and I'm sorry that my family brought me here. I want to go back to California. Okay, so then I hear her motivation is to get out of here. She doesn't like it. Great. Well, if you don't want to be here, then how do we get you somewhere where you want to be? Because that's going to be her success. If we're somewhere we don't want to be and we're just stuck, we're miserable. So I said, okay, what if I told you I will get you to California if you help me with your issues, and you work with me, and we work together as a team to help resolve what we can. That showed a little light in her eyes. I had a hard time trying to figure out what resources she would need, because again, it's very individualized. So this person might involve AODA and mental health, and some job skills. This person might have Social Security disability, so they don't need the income, but maybe they have some mental health. So I've got to take this person and go, okay, now what team am I building around them? So for this female, it was criminal justice, a lot of criminal justice problems due to her AODA issues. So it involved me working with the district attorney's office. It involved me working with her public defender, which as a police officer is very foreign. We're typically not playing on the same side as they are. But to help this individual, it's 100% necessary, and it actually came out to be very appropriate. So then as we worked on those issues, clearly there's an AODA aspect. So then I partner with my partner, Monica, from the healthcare center that Michael Loy put on our team, and say, okay, how do we get this aspect? So we work on her AODA problems. That first step was a fail. We got her in treatment, and like 5 days before she was to finish treatment, she sabotaged it, as she typically did with some of her resources. And so we brought her back. The only way I could really work with her is to use the jail as a place for her to be. I knew she would stay sober. I knew she was safe. And quite honestly, she was okay with that, because she also kind of saw that. So she did something where I was able to take her to jail. Not specifically for that, but it worked out. Kept her in jail, worked with the jail social worker, and came up with some other ideas. Okay, the inpatient treatment didn't work. What else can we do? Well, she really wants to get to California. So then I go into Matt's office and I go, Matt, hey, I know you think I'm crazy, but like, I'm gonna need you to buy some tickets, some airplane tickets to California. If I'd have done that 2 years ago, he'd have thrown me out of his office. You gotta be kidding me. We're a police department, we're not a travel agency. But he also understood the value of, we're resolving this person's problem. He said, all right, well, do what you need to do and come back and we'll see. He says, I recognize that might be the best solution. So I spent the next probably month and a half working with the jail social worker, trying to find a place in California that would be accepting of this female. And that's going on the Google and saying, okay, where's a treatment center? Picking up the phone. Hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. I know it's a little crazy, but this is what I need. Do you think? And all of them were no, except for one. And probably 50 to 75 centers later of cold calling, hey, this is what I'm doing, I found one that said, you know, we've got a federal program that just might work, that we think that we could plug her into. It's a little different than what we're used to, but let's see what we can do. February 19th, I picked her up from jail after we resolved her other criminal justice issues using the district attorney's office and her public defender. I picked her up from jail. I drove her to Minneapolis at 1 in the morning. Myself, Tracy Rieger from Catholic Charities, who's very familiar with her also, hopped on an airplane with her. We stopped in Denver. We dropped her off in Long Beach, California. On the descent into Long Beach, I said, hey, look out the window. There's palm trees. Yeah, I know. She starts tearing up. I said, you're home. You came home. What I didn't tell you is this female spent a majority of her adult life in California. So that's why she wanted to go back. So she understood that, she recognized that, and that was very powerful for her. This is a hardened individual, didn't show us a lot of emotion, but at that point, she really broke down and had tears in her eyes. And I said, Jocelyn, I promised you that if you followed what I needed you to do and you worked with me, that I'd get you home. She said, yeah, I know, Eric. I know. You've always been truthful with me, and I knew you would. I just wasn't sure how to do it. We dropped her off, got on the plane, flew back through Denver and back to Minneapolis, and at 12:30 Saturday morning, Tracy and I pulled into the parking lot at the police department. Done. Task complete. Success. To us, we did what we were asked to do. To her, it was a life-changing event that she can look at and say, look at what the Wausau Police Department, look at the community of Wausau did for me. I think that will forever speak volumes. She called me today. I didn't have a chance to speak with her, but you can hear in her voice, she is exactly where she needs to be. And she's still in treatment. It's a 90-day treatment program with the option of having another 90 days to help her with housing, whatever she may need. She's still in there. She's excelling. She sounds happy. She's working through her issues. And that's just something we couldn't do for her here for several reasons. So to be able to look at somebody and say, you have to listen and say, what do they need? What does this person need? Because what I want to do with them doesn't matter. It'll never be successful.
So the mayor has a question.
I don't have a question, but I want to share with everybody here that, like, this story specifically feels very personal to me. I was elected I came into office on the 21st of April last year, and I just had to look it up at the day, but on May 6th, 2020, I wrote this, and I said, I'm still up thinking. Today I stopped by one of the areas where homeless people in our area set up camp. There was a citizen complaint about some garbage that initiated a string of responses, but it seemed important for me to go there to understand. I don't know what I expected, but there was a lot of stuff, clothes strewn everywhere, dozens of hotel-sized soaps. These are details you probably don't need. But anyway, I was there with the police chief, the deputy chief, and 2 people from nonprofits who are working on homelessness every day. We were quietly taking it all in when a woman who had been living there showed up at the path leading down to that area. Did somebody die? She asked, assuming that's why we were there. And we had a very meandering conversation, and at one point she recited the poem Le Pont Mirabeau in French. She shared that she had been trying to get arrested so she would have a warm place to stay, and she hoped, she actually said this point, she hoped she didn't wake up, how she wants to sleep somewhere warm. The nonprofit people got her a bed. I know that the deputy chief was very involved in helping make that happen. And this is one of those things where, like, my final thought was that I was encouraged, but I know it's going to be a process. And so again, like, this was May 6th, 2020. And so by February, I mean, it's a long process, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. Like, it's less than a year, and she's still gonna have a lot of things to work on, but like, this is encouraging, you're helping real people. So I'm glad that we could all be a part of this.
So,
Right.
Officer, from the community's perspective, why is homelessness a police issue?
That's a great question. What I've found out, and initially when I was asked to do this, I had the same question of, why, I can take people to jail, I can write people tickets, I write reports, why am I getting involved? Well, let me tell you that having a uniformed officer, even somebody on the phone introducing themselves as Officer Lemeron, is an influence that you can't find anywhere, and a positive influence. So we can't use our position to make gains for ourselves, but by golly, I can do it to help people. And that's what it's turned into. I've been able to get IDs for homeless individuals who are about to lose their housing voucher. I'm talking like 2 hours to find an apartment. And I can obtain IDs and birth certificates through government channels because they have a uniformed officer standing before them saying, yeah, I'm telling you, this is Bob. If that's good enough for you, I would appreciate it. We have some stuff we have to do. And they say, yeah, we get that. Here you go. Because you are who you are and you're trusted. Monica can call a place and say, hi, I'm Monica from North Central Healthcare, and this is what I'd like to do. And she may get a response. She may have to leave a message. It's actually funny between the two of us because I go, here, let me call. Hey, this is Officer Lemeron from the Wausau Police Department. Here's kind of what I need. Is that possible? Oh yeah, sure. What can we do? Well, how do we do this? And so to have this influence, this badge, this title, it does wonders for these individuals because that's really what they need is just somebody to help pull them over that barrier.
Michael?
So I'm listening to you, and I've listened to this presentation, in a number of different places, and obviously I have a different perspective on this, and I've been about as much out of this as most people in this room, even though I'm attached to this project. And it's a reminder of one of the best leadership lessons, and that is find great people and then get out of their way. You and Monica have done a tremendous job, and I'm sure you could go through a lot of things tonight that would make us all proud of what we're doing. And our job as a task force is to provide community-led public safety recommendations regarding how to best protect the human health, safety, and general welfare of our residents. I absolutely think that we should be engaged in the way that what we're doing in a broad sense. I think that we're effective in our approach, but you came up to the podium tonight and you asked for, maybe the opportunity not to provide stories or overviews, but to actually seek direction, potentially about what you would like from us or what we'd like to see. I really appreciate how you said that, homelessness is an individualized problem. I would be interested, and the mission of what we're trying to solve here is to understand what resources you do not have or that you need to be able to do your job effectively, knowing that you have personas and detailed knowledge on 50 people that, are the problem we're trying to solve and a place we should be as a community. So what are those things, if that would be okay?
Sure. I know that we could use some sort of detox facility. We've had 2 people that have needed treatment, that have needed medical detox because of the depth of their addiction. And we've had to take them to a facility in Eau Claire, hour and a half each way, then go pick them up, That time's valuable, but just to be able to say, yes. The biggest issue with that is these people have to be caught in that moment, that flicker of vulnerability. So that flicker is now, but I don't have the resource now. It's gone in an hour or tomorrow when I re-encounter them and go, okay, I've got a plan. And really where these gaps that we identify in services are, that's what it boils down to, is I have these fleeting moments where I can help them and they really want it. Another one is a long-term treatment facility where you've been drinking for 30-some years or more, 10 years, 20 years, decades. 30 days of treatment frequently doesn't work because they just get to the point where maybe they're breaking down the barriers that they need to, and they're done. They've completed what they've been asked to do, but they're not anywhere near where they need to be on their own. I've seen a few people out here that have been very successful in 30-day treatment, and they come back and the first thing they do is pick up a drink because they don't know what to do. They're lost. If I had all the staffing I would need and an unlimited budget, someone said, Eric, what do you need? This is what I tell people. I would grab the dorms from the U, and I would fill them with the homeless individuals that we identify. And I would take and get 5, 6 case managers that are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they would be responsible for, let's say, the most chronic homeless are on the 3rd floor, and maybe the intermediate are on the 2nd floor, and the people that are closest to being independent maybe on the 1st floor, and you just work with them night and day. That's one of the other holes that we've seen, is we just don't have the ability to constantly be focused on Jennifer. And even 8 hours a day isn't going to work. They just need that constant feedback, that constant assistance. I think that would be phenomenal to have a facility like that where they have that sort of attention and can get that. That's not coming from any sort of education that I have. That's just what I see, my sheer observations.
Go ahead.
I plan on helping you with the first two. The county's invested in that with our project on both of those elements, so that should be a success story here relatively shortly. But the third one, putting a wall around homelessness and housing them, there is, I'm sure, some situations where people are hesitant to enter those facilities for whatever reason. If we were to do something like the dorm, we, with the other facility, didn't make sobriety a condition. What other things, in addition to not making sobriety a condition necessarily for somebody to stay there, would be barriers that we could overcome to get people to actually be in those facilities and to come for those services?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, really rapport. That's something that I focus on from day one of this assignment, is making sure that they know that I'm not here in this uniform coming because they're in trouble, because that's what the police do. They get me in trouble. They arrest me. They cause me problems. They just make my world worse. I'm not that guy. I've specifically not taken, I've probably 90% of my time is on non-enforcement activity. The only enforcement that I've taken, in fact, is to help them over a barrier, like the female that I helped to California. Jail was her best place, so that's where we needed to get her. I've got another person that has a lot of mental health problems. Jail is the best place because we can get them competency hearings. We can have a safe, sober place for them should they need it. But that rapport, the rapport of saying, hey, Bob, I know you got a lot of problems, and I'm here to talk. And at some point, they will, I promise you, they will trust you enough to do that. And I've seen it with some of the most chronic homeless individuals. Some of them are the people that come up to me and say, hey, listen, I know I screwed up yesterday, but can we take another stab at it, or let's have a conversation. I sat on the sidewalk in front of Jalapenos on Monday, I believe it was, talking with one of our homeless individuals who's a big drinker and actually exited our program because he wasn't ready for it. For half hour, 45 minutes, just talking, just the same old stuff like, hey, you're worth it. I believe in you. I wish you would believe in you. I know, but I don't have value. Well, see, that's where you're wrong because you have value. If you didn't have value, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. It's really important.
So have you been tracking the community partners campus discussions? And how do you see if the homeless shelter portion advances, how do you see that as helping?
I think the community campus, partnership campus is a fantastic idea. As Deputy Chief said, this has opened my eyes to a lot of things that I hadn't been exposed to or been mildly exposed to, and to have a place where all the resources is invaluable to them. Again, these people don't have a lot of resourcefulness. Their idea of a day is, I've got to find my alcohol or whatever my other substance is. Typically it's alcohol. I've got to find my alcohol. I've got to find a place to go, and I've got to survive. I've got to make it. What time? Okay, I got to get breakfast. All right, I've gotten breakfast. Now I probably need some more alcohol, or I'm going to go see what the guys are doing. Okay, oh, it's lunch. So these people are surviving. So to be able to give them the resources neatly wrapped up is a great idea.
So I'm just going to interject a couple of comments now, because I think one of the reasons we're here is that the homeless create demands on the police department from people who are concerned about their congregating in gazebos or their presence downtown or their drinking, and it creates demands on the police department. In some cases, I know that there's the looking forward to being arrested and placed in jail. So from a public safety perspective, there are significant demands upon the system right now from them, and I credit the police department for the initiative of working with them to try to address it on a permanent and holistic basis. But for those that think that it isn't a problem, I would direct them to the number of complaints we get, the number of calls that they go on. I'd also like to point out that with the passage of the American Recovery Act, Marathon County will be receiving $26,316,628 for COVID-related activities. The city is going to receive $15,747,334. There's going to be $50 million of dollars coming into the county that are somewhat related to COVID, but I think that if we're creative, we can look at how we can take that one-time money and begin to look at facilities and/or programming to address some of these issues, to deal with it on a permanent basis. So I would hope that we as a task force would be creative in potentially looking at potential recommendations. In addition to the money earmarked for the communities, there are, mental health and substance abuse treatment and prevention initiatives that are in there, and I would hope that we would take the opportunity to look carefully at those programs to see if we can do the things that you were asking of us. But I've had some recent discussions that have been somewhat disturbing in the context of even people in allied health or allied law enforcement agencies not recognizing the demands that homelessness place. And I think that's because they're not in the city, they don't see it, or they don't recognize it, or they're not responding to it. But we have a real community. I thank you, Eric, for your work, and Matt and the department for the foresight to create the position. The question is how do we move forward? And I think Michael laid it out, and on the concept of the dorm, given Will and my roles on the county board, we can take that back to the county for discussion. I think that it might be timely, given that facility is aging, and so thank you for that. And Matt, you've come up for a reason.
Yeah, Eric and I look at issues through two different lenses sometimes, and from a management of the police department, why do we need an Eric, and why is it a good thing to have someone in his position? We know that we've seen a reduction in the calls for service to a population that we've identified as calling it 50 people. Well, we have a city population of about 40,000, just shy of 40,000, and 50 of those people are absorbing 40 to 50 hours a month while Eric is in his position, not counting his time. That's us responding to medical emergencies, disorderly behaviors, unconscious individuals, things that we can directly tie to that face of homelessness population. And so that's reactive policing. And we have always believed that our role should be proactive as well as reactive. So Eric is playing the proactive role in trying to solve that problem. And while the rest of our patrol officers are still spending, even with that effort, 40 to 50 hours a month being reactive to it. And we didn't even take the time to ask the fire department how many calls for service a month they're taking to medically transport individuals, and the drain that might be on our emergency services as a result of that. So why do we need people involved? We're involved whether we like it or not, and we just believe that this is a better way to get long-term solutions to that problem. What other things are necessary was, I believe, a question you asked, or what might we do? I don't know how this works with the city, but I know that when I have had conversations with individuals that find themselves in that situation, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and they're heavily intoxicated and they're in our parks, the question has to come up is, from a policy board, is it appropriate to make recommendations that we change what we allow, where we allow people to drink in our community and where we allow people to spend their time and their behaviors that they're exhibiting while they're there? I would offer to this task force that we had similar issues on the 400 block, and we tried numerous things and it really revolved around drinking. Many of these, not all, but many of these 50 individuals are hardcore alcoholics that are intoxicated every single day and will go into withdrawal if they're not. And, we came up with a balanced solution of no drinking before 4 o'clock, and that seemed to resolve issues on the 400 block. We have the place that provides shelter and provides opportunity for this population is Big Bull Falls Park and what we call the gazebo and Barker Stewart Island. All things that we're trying to do great things within our community. And these are members of our community that have every right to be there, just like I have a right to be there. But we also have to think of the whole of the community and trying to balance the expectation of the community to be able to use their parks and have them be appropriate and functional. And the needs of a homeless population are very difficult. And they're very difficult for a police department that has no policy setting authority. So I would ask, just as you think about these solutions or recommendations you might have, like, what role could policymaking be in not only providing resources, but also providing an environment that that takes care of many of the complaints that come to the police department about behaviors that we see? Thank you.
Pat?
Yeah, bouncing back, I suppose the deputy chief could answer this too, but for Eric, it sounded like one of the keys to getting that woman out of the community was to free her from entanglements with charges she was facing over at the courthouse. I'm just wondering if it sounded like you got charges dismissed or resolved in that process?
Yeah.
Yes, and I'll tell you, so one of the resolutions to a case was 2 years probation. Well, if she's on 2 years probation, she's not going anywhere. So I approached the DA's office, district attorney's office, and I said, hey, again, I get this is crazy, but my whole thing is thinking outside the box to get this resolved, because thinking in the box has done nothing. What if she revoked her own probation and we sentenced her to, she had stayed a few days in jail, like 60. What if time served? Yeah, maybe is that appropriate for the crime at which the crime was not horrible anyway, disorderly conduct or something smaller. And their response was, we don't know, we've never tried that. Can we try it? Yeah, I guess. I don't know why we couldn't. So what can we do that we haven't normally done to find this resolution? If it's not, we can't do it, then let's try to do it. And so I was able, again, working with all those individuals, the court system, the public defender's office, district attorney's office, to say, okay, we're not saying she doesn't get punished. We're saying her punishment now is making her problem worse. And I see that a lot in this position. So how can we make the punishment appropriate so she can move on with her life and this community can heal from any disruption that has been caused?
So it sounds like you have the basis of a mechanism. You know, next time around, you'll have a better path, and people will know that, yeah, that worked out okay, we can do that.
Sure, yes,
So that's a step forward in itself.
correct.
Good.
So, other comments or questions? Officer Lemron, thank you very much for your service, your dedication and commitment, and your willingness to break down barriers.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your time.
So, you know, our hope is that we will begin to bring these issues in on a couple, you know, at least, you know, every meeting, every other meeting, so that we can begin to identify what those issues are. I don't know if you've seen the American Rescue Plan, or the American Recovery Act, or Rescue Act, but there are, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau has prepared things, National Association of Counties has prepared overviews. They're still waiting for the U.S. Treasury Department to finalize some of the rules and some of the agencies to develop the policy for administering it. Many of the dollars will flow through the states, but I think it creates opportunities for us to be perhaps innovative. And, you know, I listen to the Health and Human Service in the county, and so there may be a broader role, but give some thought to that, and we'll share some of these overviews, and maybe I'll work with Gene and we'll get the links out to you in the next couple of days. Maybe we'll package it with what Eric's got, so we'll give you one big package for you to consider and look ahead. I think Michael will be looking to you and North Central to talk about some of the services. I think that, again, Officer Lemron identified the detox facility and the long-term treatment facility, and, you know, what role can you play in some of these things going forward? Because it really is that community coming together to deal with some of these problems, so we can reduce recidivism and address the dignity of the individual. So we'll have those discussions going forward, and I know the Sheriff's Department is working on providing some information on a number of areas, so we can look at that going forward. So any questions or comments?
Yeah, so I've had a thought, but and if it's not appropriate for this forum, let me know. But I had thought about, one of the discussions that came up obviously was, the other name for it is wet houses. But one of the things that I used to do when I lived in Madison, I used to volunteer at Occupy Madison. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it is a tiny home park set up for homeless people. And if you ever get the chance when you're in Madison, you should visit it. It is a self-sustaining community. The homeless people there help build their own tiny homes. They have a main little, it's not a huge space area. It's like one main unit where there's a workshop where they build bird houses and different things, different crafts and stuff. They usually sell that to get money to help with supplies to continue to build homes and structures. And it has the bathroom and the kitchen. And then they have their own tiny homes. And it really has given a lot of them, a sense of purpose, their own home, and been able to help a lot of them sort of, now that they're using their talents and potential, get off of, help them, seek help, have value within themselves. I think it's really been successful, and part of that is funded by, so how it works is part of it is funded by a grant, and then they have to, I think, match the grant, the funding, and so that's why they work themselves to raise the money to keep where they're living. Mm-hmm. But it's been a program that has worked really well. I can get information, more information for it. I can try to reach back out to my contacts, but I don't know if that might be a recommendation we can make. I think when I was starting to run for office, I think I had asked about it at one point, and I think there were issues mentioned about zoning for these places, but it might be something, if we could look into it, and look at the model that's been used, and see if that could possibly work for our community in providing long-term sustainable housing, because I know largely we've had an issue with, big scale, large building, affordable housing. Usually, we can't just build something new, in terms of money. We have to use a existing facility and rehabilitate that. Well, what about them building their own little small homes? If we could get an area where you could kind of have a little park. And like I said, it's just been, in my view, and having volunteered there, it's done tremendous for the people that were there, especially when you hear some of their stories. But just something I'm just putting out there that maybe we could look more into, or if this is an appropriate forum or committee in terms of that is a recommendation and getting more information, let me know.
Michael?
I think you had Pat at Woodshop. He was there. He was going to be part of that recommendation. But the policy issue relative to this topic tonight, which is, I think, should law enforcement be involved in social and human service response? There, I think, are three choices there, which is the answer is no, and they shouldn't be, and someone else should do it. The other answer is they should, and they should be better trained to do it. And then the third option, I think, is yes, they should be involved, but they should team with professionals in those areas to solve the problems in a teaming type fashion. I think that's the right path, given my experience and what we're seeing here are results. And if you hear, the deputy chief speak tonight and Officer Lehrman, they're using data to inform that. I mean, the data around how many hours they're spending with homelessness, the data they're spending with domestic violence, I mean, it's there. So for us to be able to measure the impacts of whatever policy direction we give them, I think we have the ability to do that. And I think it's inherently by teaming with other social and human service agencies to jointly respond and problem solve these issues. So I, hope that that's what we're working towards, is giving direction or policy implications to the city and the department in that regard. Maybe that's not the answer, but that's kind of how I see the discussion tonight and trying to summarize it and think about next steps.
I think you framed it well, and maybe we could begin to work on, that option paper and then start ticking off recommendations. So we'll try to put that together for the next, maybe not the next meeting, but the meeting after that. So, other questions or comments? Again, Officer Lemeron, thank you very much for sharing your efforts. Matt, thank you for filling in and enlightening us on the social service connection. The next meeting will be, and on the 21st at 6:30, we'll be focusing in primarily on the survey design. I'll have discussions with Eric. If we think we can squeeze in another item or two, we will. Otherwise, we'll dedicate that meeting to the continued effort to get the citizens engaged in this process. So is there anything else, any other announcements, or any other item that you would like to bring before us tonight? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you. Will and Katie, I need to talk to you.
Did you add me to that so that I can send out a WebEx tomorrow morning? So that I don't forget. Did you request this room?